Uh, Good evening or good day. Uh, there is a series of conversations that push me to think about left wing politics and its Christian pretensions. More so when left wing activists or somebody left leaning would like to leverage Christianity and present it as safe and present the preposition as if that is the Christian frame, or that is the Christian, right? Like yes, like if somebody is committed to the Christian faith, that's the approach or the method they should. That's the that's the frame they should adopt politically in the society and the world that they live in. And the thing that got me thinking much about that was I finished a series of documentaries called "Breaking the Silence: My Amy Story," and I'd watched some Alyssa Childers videos, and I was introduced to Damon Garcia, who considers himself to be a Christian socialist, right? And it just happens to so time it's the same day that I was reading the third chapter of Gaetano Mosca's The Ruling Class, right? And so these ideas were now swinging in my head, right? So on one end, I'm thinking about what's the best political frame that an individual should take in this community, and at the same time, there are these two individuals, Alessa and Damon, who are coming out of this evangelical tradition, and one adopts socialism while the other seeks to practice a more historic Christianity, right? And there's this how Mosca describes the political frame, like how Mosca style analysis of the political conflict that is taking place, and how the factions are aligning, trying to exploit the religious beliefs of the people in order to co-opt them for their movement. And to the best of my knowledge, to my understanding of what is being presented, I see this as Vosh for the evangelical youth, right? I might be accused of being a bit too harsh, but that this is exactly it. Like for the person who sees the Vosh to be too degenerate, right? To seriously consider what his position is that way presenting the same ideas, package the same thing that is more palatable to their ethical frame, right? And it usually takes the form as where they're presenting it as liberation theology or post-colonialism theology, right? And then that they're pitting this against dogma, right? But then if you look at the object of this theology, it's not the theos, because they're not gaining logos about theos, right? But it's attacking dogma, right? And for me, it's odd in that when you think through stages of capitalism, right? Which I think the final stage would be something that most Christians would object to, right? And just how there's well-meaning political movements were just like they're just intermediate stage. It's an intermediate phase in which we come to the end point of capitalism, right? Which some people believe would be some type of neo-feudalism, right? Some type of so between so that's a feudal system under the rule of the capitalist, right? But then so apparently we are to deal with this problem of that outcome using this contra-Christian ideas presented as Christian ideas, right? And so we end up having this so Brueggemann warns us from being servants of empire, right? That the Christian is supposed to be committed to the kingdom of God. But then these people now would be, so the typical attack in that if somebody knows that you are conservative minded or conservatively oriented, and that you have a certain respect for Jesus, right, the figure of Jesus, and for his teachings, right, And so the typical attack would be, let's say, for instance, Jesus was not a Republican, right? Would Jesus have supported Trump? Or like Jesus cared about the poor, right? Does the hoarding of wealth bother Jesus, right? And so you're being pushed to apparently join this progressive faction, right? And to leave aside that other conservative faction of this same political regime. Either way, you still be a servant of the empire. So rather than them calling you to be detached from, right, the kingdom of this world, right, and to devote yourself to the kingdom of God, and in your dealings with people, that you're to love your neighbors, you love yourself. All these ideas are co-opted, right, and they are being given this strange frame that it would suppose the progressive faction of the political elite of the country that they're in. And when you look at the fruit that the so-called Christian left is producing, which I could be accused of judging summarily, right? Because for one, I don't have the capacity to measure everything. But then if I'm thinking politically and I'm looking at the social movement, so I'm thinking purely from political impact. So if I ask myself, what is the fruit of their political impact? Which faction and what ethical principles, what cultural forces have they managed to advance? And I compare them to, let's say, something about like the Reformation, right? Which is like a response to Pope Alexander VI in some respect. Or when you think about the Great Awakening or the Azusa Street Revival. I do not see such a thing coming from the Christian left. But then if somebody is aware of some event in history that can point me to, it'd be nice if I could check it out. And also like in their frame with building institution building, right? Because for me it strikes me of more of institution co-opting, right? And it's not the first time that it's happened, right? What is it? Like if you think about the Jesus seminar in academia, right? Where these people are apparently using modern methods to come to a more accurate understanding of Jesus and his teaching. And when you look at the fruits of that, what did it birth, right? So if you think about, let's say, in the point of institution building, when I was like reading on the history of the Trinity Broadcasting Network, how it's just these two amateurs who believe God has told them that they're to start a TV station, and they do so in their house and without training or funding, right? Or if I consider the impact of Reagan's moral majority on American politics as, on one way, as a response to the 60s and the hippie movement, right? Maybe. I do wonder if that's part of the issue that was that allowed Reagan to build his coalition, right? And I look for similar movements, right, of similar political impact in the countries that have been totally overrun by progressivism. It's when the Christians were convinced that it's okay, they can just sit back and they can hand control of institutions, right? They can leave it in the hands of people who do not believe what they believe, care for what they care about, in the name of that they'll be kind in doing and helping people. And so I found that they were totally ineffectual and aiding those who would seek to destroy them and co-opt their institutions, right? And so if you look at what happened to the schools and the universities they started, right? And so they end up being dispossessed, right? And this is why I'm thinking that it's wash for the evangelical youth, right? And so it appears to me that it's as if their epistemology has been seized, right? As if they have allowed their minds to be possessed by this odd notion that the methodology, right, the style of intellectual inquiry of Foucault and Derrida would actually lead them to an understanding of Jesus and allow the image of God to somehow form within them, and they can now live out the Christian virtues in a way that will be of impact to their community, and that more people will be able to have an understanding of what Jesus taught and the type of social man that Christ was seeking to create, right? and somehow that we are to see this taking of Enlightenment rationalism and Enlightenment romanticism, and we can combine them into the truth that Jesus was trying to express. And yet they have opposed goals and opposed epistemology and opposed ethical frames and systems, right? And for me, this is like being given the choice between Pope Gregory the Great and Pope Alexander the Sixth, right? And so when I look at Pope Gregory the Great at the end of what he did, at the end of his service to the church and his activity in the church, you would say in some ways he helped for the restoration of Rome that was in a very bad state. But then if you look at the end of what Alexander the Sixth was pursuing, at the end of it all was just the corruption of Rome. And many people would agree that one of the reasons that the Reformation managed to get so much steam was the scheming and the moral actions of Pope Alexander the Sixth, right? But then if you notice of the amount of trust people were able to have in the institution of the church, right, allowing them to be the priestly class of their community, under Gregory, you notice that it's quite different from under Alexander, right? And so one produces the city of God, right? The choices that Pope Gregory makes, the actions that he takes, it's the kind of thing that will be cited as a plus, right, in Augustine writing the City of God. But then if you compare it with the Reformation, so when they point to Alexander the Sixth and his actions and his decisions and the fruit of his life, it causes people now to say that, would you want to be in an institution that is being captured with such a man, right? Or alternatively, I can also compare them with the Amish and the woke church, whereby many people would agree that there are two expressions of extremes. But then, which extreme was capable of propagating itself and birthing something new? So the Amish, perhaps we can complain that sometimes they forget that there's a distinction between the public and the universal, right? And even sometimes maybe with the private. But then with the woke church, this conflation of the good to be the personal. What is it producing, right? And there was also this strange preoccupation with some odd non sequitur arguments, right? And so one time I remember there was this discussion on discussion on abortion, and the person decided the strategy they were going to use was this odd rhetorical attack, and they started by saying that abortion was not a political issue prior to the Christian right politicizing it, which is quite an odd way to try to persuade somebody to come to your political side, right? Or when a Christian brother, KB, was talking about political activity, and they're saying that he will not tell you who to vote for, but he'll try to encourage you to think through the issues, right? Or when someone says, this is another brother, Ruslan, when we were speaking about, what was that point he was making? Oh yeah, that he's political agnostic. He's not for the Republicans or the Democrats, but he'll vote for them in accordance to what he feels the issues would be. And he vote, and yeah, so, or even Biden talking about how important Catholicism is to his service to his people, right? That he's a devout Catholic, and yet he would reject the teachings on abortion, right? And even though in previous time he spoke about how that influences his faith and he influences his understanding. And so when people raise such points and such ideas, they strike to me as non sequitur argument. And so I struggle to understand why that would be a point that you'd make in a debate. So if I'm on the Christian right and seeking to bring about a political end, why would the frame by which would weaken Christianity and consume Christianity be the one that one would seek to adopt? And if we see that the right is that which seeks to preserve that which is good, so that I'm now borrowing from Roger Scruton, right? like this good that you want to keep alive. So you could say the Christian right, they see certain good in Christianity that wants to preserve them. And the left is the one that seeks to reform them. Would you want to reform that what Jesus gave? It's one thing to push people to return to that which they lost. It's another thing to push for them to adopt a frame that never existed or they never accepted. So when you look at these post-structuralist philosophies, right, the denial of truth, they relativize things that are either universal or personal. Isn't that an inconsistency that cannot be reconciled? And therefore, for me, it strikes to me that all these arguments about helping people are just Christian pretensions, right? It's no different from what you'd accuse the Christian right of doing. And so for me, it's something that I really struggle to understand and make sense of. And that's why I think that left-wing politics purely just has Christian pretensions. And considering the fruit of the political movements and that which it is birthed amongst the community of the faithful, is it something really that somebody will pursue?